Okay, it's going to be a bit of a different episode this week because my Wi-Fi completely collapsed 5 minutes before I was due to record with my special guest, Jacqueline Kelly from Our Brave Hearts this week, and she's an angel, so we're going to do it next week instead. So I've got quite a lot of things to say about the 3 Lazy Girl news stories this week, so maybe I'll just record it by myself and see how we go. Number 1 Lazy Girl news story is about the Cass report. Now, as a group, trans people have long had a really easy time, said no one ever, so it's a really welcome break for them that the government have taken the recommendations from NHS England's Cass report so very seriously and decided to implement the easiest part that was recommended, namely taking away puberty blockers for children who are experiencing gender dysphoria. So the Cass report also said that mental health support for kids is basically absolute crap, but I guess the government aren't as stressed about that. Now, the Cass report was commissioned by NHS England, which is the independent body that works to provide checks and balances for the NHS. Dr. Hilary Cass looked over CAMS, which is the mental health support for children in NHS England, and specifically the care for children experiencing gender dysphoria and trans children. And what came out of it was a recommendation, or at least that NHS is failing young people. The feeling was that children were being moved to trans-specific care and puberty blockers before exploring other options. And from what I understand, what wasn't being said was nobody should have puberty blockers. Nobody should have them at all. What was being said was there should be a holistic treatment, which would include exploring other parts of the child's identity, which might include undiagnosed autism and ADHD, of course their gender dysphoria, and also depression and anxiety. Now, the reason that I have a problem with this report, and of course how the government and also Labour, who have said they will agree to all of the recommendations and would implement all of the recommendations if they were in power, so they wouldn't challenge a single one. The reason I have an issue with it is that, number one, so people who have been prescribed puberty blockers are so minimal. There is hardly any. I think there was like 1,000 people, that's it, have been prescribed puberty blockers. And yes, of course, mental health support should be provided as well, and therapy should be provided as well. But it's not an either or, it's a yes. These puberty blockers, being able to treat trans children, is a matter of life or death in many cases. And the other issue that I have with this report is that it takes the view that the evidence supplied has to be of the highest quality, which means that the evidence should be essentially double-blind evidence, which means that there should be a control group. Now, that will literally never happen, because double-blind meaning people are prescribed treatment and only one of them actually gets the treatment, but both of them think they're getting the treatment. You would never do that because it's completely unethical in this particular case. So what does that mean? Do we then have to wait for the children, the 1,000, the very small sample of children that have had puberty blockers, to go through their whole life, die, and then we look back on it and go, oh, okay, yeah, that worked out? That could be 60 years. 80 years. So I have a problem with the whole thing. And actually, Germany have taken the view that, okay, yes, we don't have the highest quality of evidence in terms of measuring scientific studies. However, we have the best possible evidence in the circumstances. We're never going to get any better evidence than this in the time frame that we would need it. They're taking a view, which I think is what we should be doing as well. There should be no reduction on, or guidelines saying you're not really supposed to be, you can only give puberty blockers in the most serious cases, which is what's happening across the board in the NHS. We should be saying, okay, we need to pump money into mental health services. Obviously that's not going to happen, but those are my thoughts on the Cass report. So number 2, now this is juicy. In response to Israel's deadly attack on their consulate in Syria, which killed several IRGC Quds Force commanders, Iran retaliated by seizing an Israeli billionaire's ship in the Red Sea before firing very slow-moving drones and missiles towards the Iron Dome. Most of the drones were shot down. I think almost all of them were shot down by allies, UK and the US, and Iran confirmed that on Twitter, which apparently is where you confirm really important diplomatic news. The matter can be deemed concluded, so they aren't taking any more action. Nonetheless, Israel requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council for support and said, we will exact the price from Iran in the fashion and timing that is right for us. Okay, so my thoughts on this are that this was a performative response, retaliation from Iran to appease the US. What I mean by that is Israel was unprecedented in bombing a consulate in terms of Israel and Iran. The response to that, there has to be a response because there has to be. The choices are either Iran doesn't respond and is then seen to be incredibly weak, or they respond in a very aggressive way, killing people, in which case they're then leaving themselves vulnerable and open to the US retaliating, or there may be a secret third option. I think the secret third option was we're going to use the model of drone that is very slow moving. We will leak the information so everybody knows it, and we know that happened even though everybody says it didn't, because it was all over the media that they had fired drones and they were on their way to Israel and they were going to get there at XYZ. They knew that meant that because they were very slow moving, that gave everybody a chance to close their airfields and send planes up to shoot them down. Then it's done. And then to say specifically, we are done, US and the UK, like, back off. We don't want any retaliation from you. Just go away. That makes sense to me, that they would do that and just be done with it. But what I'm seeing from Israel is they're so bullish in their response. It feels almost like the US have said, okay, look, this is what we're going to do. Iran are going to do a fake retaliation. You, Benjamin Netanyahu, you need to chill out and don't respond. And some of his cabinet have responded saying, yeah, like, it's done. We don't anticipate there's going to be any drama here. There's not going to be any casualties when they heard it. But then he has taken a different approach, of course, which is to go to the UN Security Council, get his allies, get the US to make really bullish, hyperbolic, insanely hypocritical statements about how it is just appalling that Iran responded in this way. The UK obviously also condemning these bullish attacks, over-the-top attacks by Iran, which were a retaliation and didn't kill anybody. Let's just, unlike the other way round, where Israel killed, I think, 6 commanders, reportedly more. And I noticed when I think I was watching something on YouTube, and that was just this morning, and there was an advert. I will guarantee that it was paid for by Israel, and it just said Iran fired drones at religious sites in Jerusalem, which I don't believe to be true. I haven't read that anywhere else in any of the mainstream media. I haven't read it, and it feels like something straight out of Israel's playbook. of propaganda, and then it said Iran is a world threat, a global threat, which almost feels to me like Israel really want to start a war. They want to provoke Iran into action so that they can then retaliate. They know that they can't retaliate. They know that the IOF would not be able to retaliate successfully by themselves, so they would drag the US into it, and necessarily the UK. I don't think it will happen, because I think what will happen is the US will control Netanyahu in a different way, probably by allowing him to stay in power longer, or kind of helping him to get out of prison, which he will undoubtedly end up in once he's kicked out, which he will be soon enough. Yeah, I've obviously got a lot of thoughts on it, not all fully formed, but let me know what you think. Okay, so number 3. A man stabbed 6 people and injured lots more, including a 9-month-old baby, in a Sydney shopping mall before being shot dead by police. Rachel Riley and Julia Hartley-Brewer were on the case immediately with some cutting-edge journalism, tweeting that the culprit was a Muslim man carrying out an Islamic hate attack. And there were other people. Tom Tugendhat also said something similar. Now, Rachel Riley might be able to count, but she can't tell the truth because it wasn't a Muslim man. The attacker was simply a regular, unseasoned man with severe mental health issues and no ideological motivation beyond killing 5 women and 1 man. So my thoughts on this? Well, there's so much to unpack here. First of all, Rachel Riley, who... I have no words for that woman, tweeted, so Rachel Riley said, "For 6 months now, people have been out on our streets proudly calling for Intifada revolution. If you want to know what globalised the Intifada looks like, see the Sydney Mall. 5 victims stabbed to death and 8 transferred to hospital, including a baby, due to 1 man and a knife. In the second Intifada, over 1,000 Israelis were murdered in restaurants, on buses and in the streets by suicide bombings, stabbings, stoning, lynchings, shooting, rockets. The youngest victim was just 9 hours old. Sydney Mall, multiple times over, is what they've been proudly calling for." So I would say that tweet very much is linking the Sydney stabbing to the pro-Palestine movement. Now, that is factually incorrect. It's also essentially inciting hate towards Muslims. She has since apologised, except it's not an apology. She deleted that original tweet and said she wanted to add a clarification. Just to clarify, my intention with this tweet was not to say this attack was caused by any ideation or to link it to Islamic extremism. I made no reference. Referencing the marches calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, she said, "My aim was to highlight the weekly calls for Intifada being tolerated in London and around the world, which in actuality means violence on our streets. For 6 months now, I have avoided taking the tube or going out with my kids to anywhere near the marches each Saturday, and each week we see the extremist chants on proud display with little outcry. Sadly, the type of attack we see in Sydney yesterday is exactly the kind of violence the previous Intifada involved, and I hope to avoid in future, but in my opinion, ignoring the problem won't make it go away." She continued, "Attacks on Jews have recently become repackaged as resistance in some circles, and we should, in one voice, condemn all acts of violence, whoever the perpetrators and whoever the victims. I'm sorry if this message was misunderstood. That was not my intention." Well, again, there's so much to unpack there, isn't there? Because it's not an apology. It's a doubling down, saying that the pro-Palestine marches are causing violence in the streets and that they're making her feel unsafe. She might feel unsafe. I doubt it's because she's a Jew. But I've been on 5, 6 of these marches, and they're so peaceful. And there's always Jews. There are always Jewish people on pro-Palestine marches. Her lie, the pro-Palestine marches are not peaceful, because they are peaceful. You would see more violence, and this is, factual, more violence at a football match. Anyway, yeah, lots of people are calling for her to be sacked. I very much doubt she will, because this is something that she does time and time again, and she's got away with it for years. But I would like to talk about the fact that we are, or the mainstream media, or everyone seems to be ignoring the fact that this person attacked 5 women and 1 man. From the video, you can see the CCTV. He walks past men to then attack women. I think this is a very clear case of a man who hates women, and he might not have been going out specifically to kill all women, but he overwhelmingly killed women and 1 man. I always say this, right? So when we talk about, oh, we have a problem in the police, we have a problem with male police officers, we have a problem with incels, we have a problem with all these subgroups, we have a problem with men. That is what we have, is a problem with men. We have a big problem where overwhelmingly men are emboldened to commit violence against women. And I'm not just talking about physical violence, I'm talking about sexual violence that might take the form of stalking, harassment online. It might take the form of flashing. There's so many ways that violence can be perpetrated against a woman, and this has been allowed to happen by the way it's allowed in kind of the more subtle forms. You let somebody make a slightly misogynistic comment in the pub and they get away with it, so then it just continues to happen. So I think we have a men problem, and that is something that I do not understand why more people aren't talking about. I do understand it is because it's not very exciting to talk about that, is it? God. So I think that is the story, that we have a man problem. We have a problem with men. We have a problem with violence against women perpetrated by men. And what are we going to do about that? Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Next week, my guest will be Jacqueline Kelly, and I don't know what we'll be talking about yet because we just have to see where the news cycle takes us. If you want to be a guest in the future or have a great guest suggestion, then please email me, hello@lucylucraft.co.uk. Also, if you need a podcast producer, I have produced my other podcast, What She Said, in the past, and I produce lots of other people's podcasts. I'm really good and fun to work with. So get in touch if you need somebody to help you start a podcast, or you have a podcast and you just need somebody to help strategize or edit or take the whole thing on and produce it. That's it for this week. Chat to you soon.